Welcome to How to Find More Direct Clients Than You Can Poke a Stick At podcast, a mix of both solo episodes and expert interviews. Our ideal listener is an early career, ambitious, and passionate online language services provider. She is committed to professional growth and achieving success in the fiercely competitive translation and interpreting industry. She balances multiple responsibilities with resourcefulness, values mentorship, is open to learning, and investing in her professional development journey. She embraces technology and seeks to optimize workflow, eager to connect with like-minded peers and build out her professional network. She is determined to overcome challenges and become a sought-after freelance translator. And here's your host, medical translator and translator business mentor, Jason Willis-Lee.
And welcome to another episode of How to Find Direct Clients, a podcast hosted by myself, Jason Willis-Lee, the show that makes digital marketer easier and more fun with just the right combination of business strategy and tech. I'm your host, Jason Willis-Lee. I'm a digital marketing specialist, and today I'm so thrilled to welcome my guest. His name is David Shriner-Cahn. David is experienced in both consultancy and entrepreneurship, so he brings a very unique perspective to our discussion that we're about to commence. David, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be here.
You're very welcome. Can you tell us, just to break the ice, a little bit about your personal journey in consultancy, entrepreneurship, and how you see the industry, your kind of the last few years of your professional career?
Absolutely. And actually, my professional career started before that. I trained as an engineer, chemical engineering. I have a master's degree and worked as an engineer for the first few years of my career. Then I made a career pivot and I was in the nonprofit sector in the US for about 23 years. And I left employment and started a solo consulting business in 2006. So roughly 28 years as an employee, the last 18 years as an entrepreneur. I started a very simple model, solo consulting business. And I started doing some content creation, first a blog, then we launched a podcast 10 years ago in 2014. And over time, our client base more and more became solo consultants, particularly people like me that had a long career as a high achieving employee in what I define as the corporate environment, meaning you work for somebody else, whether it's small business, large enterprise, or you go back and forth, government, nonprofit, but somebody else sets the structure and creates the processes. And you are, to a certain extent, you're a cog in their wheel. Over time, as I said, our client base more and more kind of resembled my own journey. And the podcast also, in terms of the kinds of guests that I interviewed and what we talked about, also spoke to the challenges of building up expertise in a particular discipline and then trying to take that expertise and succeed in your own business. So the business skills are a new thing when you're mid-career or later, which can be quite challenging. And and in addition to the podcast, we launched a membership community for corporate refugees, which we started about 2.5 years ago.
Did the chemical engineering give you a well-defined niche at the beginning? Were you consulting with other chemical engineers, or did you branch out very quickly?
On the contrary, since I did engineering very early in my career and only for a few years, and I was in the nonprofit space for more than 2 decades, my expertise was really nonprofit management. So that was what I was consulting on. So my clients were smaller nonprofit organizations that particularly lacked some finesse when it came to finance and operations.
Let's talk about business building. So I represent a community of online language service providers. So they're mainly translators like myself. I still make a living from freelance service provision in the translation sector. They are interpreters, so they're in the booth or perhaps in meetings, liaison interpreting, consecutive interpreting, and they are possibly copywriters as well, writing copy for websites or other businesses. How could you talk a little to the business building of leveraging professional expertise? So you yourself came from chemical engineering. I'm a former medic and clinical researcher, so I ended up working on clinical trials and things that I found familiar and fairly easy to niche down into. Could you talk a little about business building in broad brushstrokes using the professional expertise that we're leveraging? Because that's what I try and teach my community. I teach them to think of themselves as entrepreneurs rather than just freelance translators, as business people running a business, and time is money, and productivity hacks and all these things. Could you talk a little bit about how you built your consultancy business, perhaps by leveraging your prior expertise that you just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. So one of the things you need to do is you need to step back and start at the strategic level. And in doing so, there are a few questions that it's really important to ask yourself. And it would help if you can take some time away from the day to day to actually do this self-reflection. And if you can do it where you're interacting with some people who know you well, where you can bounce some of these ideas off them, even better, because it's very often hard to just answer these questions on our own. But basically what you need to do is start off by identifying what's important to you in your life, not just business, but everything in your life, because business will fit into that. Because you want it, especially if you're doing something as an entrepreneur, the more it fits with your overall life vision, the better. Then create a goal statement based on what's important to you. And when I talk about a goal statement, I'm using the definition where a goal is something that is specific enough so you know when you're working toward it, but it's very big, it's audacious, it's not metric driven, so there's always more to do. So as an example, in your case, if you are helping medical translators or people in the translation business improve their businesses and grow their businesses, there will always be more to do. And when you're working on that versus something else. So that's what I mean by a broad goal statement. And then once you have your goal statement, look at one primary business related goal and break that down into measurable objectives. And this is where the metrics come in. And if you look at a goal. So for example, if your goal is to impact as many business translators as possible, how would you reverse engineer that process so that you can increase the number of people that you're impacting and the way in which you're impacting them with metrics? And you may, and then go back to maybe the first step in that process. And I like to arbitrarily pick a 90-day time frame for the first objective, because it's long enough so that there's something meaty that you can work on, but it's not so far out that it's overwhelming. So for example, if in your business, you're currently let's say you're serving an audience of 100 people in what you're doing with your online business, maybe in 90 days, you want to increase that by 10%. You want to get another 10 people in the door. So, okay, then you break that down even further into weekly activities. What would you do every single week to get 10 new people in over the next 3 months? And once you create your 90-day plan, what's really important is to interact with some thought partners around the process, because what will happen is, as we all know, our plans are based on what we know that we know and what we know that we don't know. It's what we don't know that we don't know that causes the biggest headaches. And when you're interacting with thought partners and you tell them at the beginning of the week, this is what my plan is for the next week. They can ask you questions that may help you see things you didn't see in your plan, so you may avoid some costly mistakes. They might suggest some resources you don't know about that will accelerate your progress towards achieving that metric-driven objective. So that's really important. And then if the other piece is the accountability piece, where if you tell yourself, this is what I want to do, but you are stretching yourself in the process, there are new things you need to do. Like maybe there's a new marketing technique that you need to use that you've never tried before, that you're unsure about. You may be reluctant to actually step forward and put it out there to your audience because you don't want to look like a fool. But if you know that you need to report back to those same people a week later, you're going to be more likely to actually do something that may make you uncomfortable so that you have some progress to report on. So there's, it's somewhat psychological, but it does work. When you tell somebody else what your plan is, and then you have to report back to them at a specified time later on, the likelihood of actually doing it increases, and the progress that you're going to make because of this interaction with thought partners also increases. That was part of the rationale behind starting the community we started, because this interactive process is really beneficial for everybody who's involved. So that's the basic step. But when you're looking at how you're going to make money in this process, when you're creating your objective, one of the things you can do is a little bit of market research and see in your space, what are some of the common business models? What fits, you go back to what you identified as being important for you in your life. What fits what's important to you in your life? Maybe you don't want to be tied to a working schedule that is going to tie you to specific hours. Maybe you want something that has flexibility in when you do it. So maybe there's part of the model that you choose that will help you gain some flexibility and still be very profitable. Another thing that you might see is, a common way when you're providing services is to break down your service offering into 3 methods. There's the do it for you method, which is very high touch and requires a lot of hands-on work. I could see if you're doing freelance translation, there could be a lot of do it for you. There could also be do it with you. Maybe there's some way to have the clients do some of the work where you're just providing the guidance and the framework that would take less of your time and could still be profitable. And then there is do it yourself. So maybe you take your methodology that you use and you teach other people how to deploy it, in which case it takes very little time for you. And maybe you could even create some kind of product like I know you've done this in your business, where you create a course or you create maybe a software, a very simple software plugin where people can answer some questions, plug their content in, and it spits out a good enough translation that they can then massage. And maybe for those that don't want to invest a lot of money, it could be a solution. And again, it's a different model, but look at what your competition does. And then you can look at what other kinds of businesses that are not translation businesses that provide services, ways that they may provide services where you can adapt some of those techniques into your business model. So again, think about a little market research as part of your what you're doing in terms of you could take an objective and make a portion of the 90 days just doing market research so you can come up with some ideas that you can test.
Are you familiar with Simon Sinek? He has a very popular TED Talk called Finding Your Why. And I discovered this just the other day. I think it became a book as well. And he was all about the why. I think the big quote was, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And this is Simon Sinek. So that was one question there. The second question was, what metrics can a service provider audience track during these 90-day sprints? Is it just number of clients and revenue, or are there other metrics that they could look at as well? Because I'm just thinking about my audience listening to this. They're wondering, is it just about the money they're making each month, 3K months, 4K months, 5K months, and the number of clients coming through the door, or are there other metrics that they could easily track?
There could be other metrics. You could track things like it is repeat business a big part of your business model. There's a balance that you may need to achieve between marketing efforts to bring in new clients versus customer service to keep working with the same clients over and over again.
Yep.
Right. And it's much easier to sell more to an existing client where you already have the relationship than it is to bring in somebody brand new. So another metric could be what percent of my marketing or relationship building efforts are focused on existing and past clients versus brand new people. And you could also measure what those efforts are. So, for example, I would imagine that having a strong relationship with the people you're serving is really important. In your audience, I suspect there's confidentiality involved. So there may be reluctance to work with somebody new, again, which speaks to trying to get repeat business. So you might want to measure something like, how much repeat business do my clients actually need? Or are they primarily one-offs? And maybe one of the things you need to look for as you develop your business over a long period of time is the kinds of clients that need repeat ongoing translation services versus the ones that may need it sporadically or just once.
And then for the done for you and done with you services, could that be used as a price differentiator? So could we then flesh out a different pricing regimen for those different services? So there could be a basic middle of the road service, there could be an upsell, the done with you could be the done for you could be the upsell, the done with you maybe the middle of the road, and there could be a downsell. So it's this ABC pricing option, most people going for option B. Could that be a way we could just mix up the pricing a little bit with those different services, differentiated product offers?
Very much so. And it can also increase your conversions, increase the percentage of potential clients that actually end up buying. Because if you're offering somebody a choice of three potential yeses versus a yes and a no, you're much more likely to get a yes when you're offering three yeses as the options.
Right. I'm familiar with this 90-day timeline. That's actually the timeline I like people to work on my course. I like the 5 one-to-one calls I give to be used up within the 90 days. So I need to make it clearer that it is a kind of a 90-day sprint, and then reverse engineering from intentional goal settings. Let's turn to creative entrepreneurship and creative professions in general. So I do a bit of creating, and obviously you do as well. You're a podcast host. You have, I think you told me, hundreds of downloads per episode, which sounds fantastic. You called it average. I think it's in my setting, it's definitely above average. It's very, very good. Where do you see the future of entrepreneurship and creative professions in general? We're having this boom in AI, and AI is causing some havoc, but it also creates opportunities, obviously, like any wave. Where do you think, what advice would you give aspiring solopreneurs coming into my industry, which is language service provision? What advice would you give them coming into in terms of creative professions and outlook for work?
Jason, I think there are sort of two answers to the question. One is a very broad historical answer, which is if you look back over the time, over human history, up until the industrial age, there were very few people that actually worked as employees. Most people were farmers or merchants. So they were all self-employed, or maybe it was, a family business or a very small collective. And then as the industrial age developed, the job structure that we have now developed. And I think what we've been seeing, particularly over the last 10, 20 years, is a move away from employment as the primary vehicle for providing for one's livelihood toward entrepreneurship more and more. And even in the job market, what you see is, particularly in America, you see shorter and shorter time frames in particular jobs. So it's almost like even if you are an employee, you're an entrepreneur in constantly moving from job to job over the course of your career. So instead of, 50 years ago, might have been common to have 2 or 3 jobs over the course of your career, or maybe you were working for 2 or 3 companies with some different jobs within companies. Nowadays, you might have multiple times that number in the course of a career if you stay as an employee. So that's kind of the broad strokes. And then within, specifically related to AI and technology, we have certainly seen how technology has both played a role in making it easier to be an entrepreneur. You don't need the need for capital up front to start a business has decreased significantly, particularly for service businesses. All you need is a sale. It's pretty easy to connect with people all over the world. It's easy to take payments in multiple kinds of ways that you couldn't do 20, 30 years ago. And then the technology also means that the kinds of work that people end up doing keeps shifting. So I think AI, for example, is going to have some pretty dramatic impact on the way people work. So certain kinds of functions may disappear altogether or might get drastically altered. At the same time, like we've seen with other technologies that have developed over human history, there will be new jobs and new kinds of needs and new skills that are required that we don't really know about. If you think about when the automobile was invented, certain kinds of jobs disappeared. When electricity was invented, certain kinds of jobs disappeared. When telegraph and telephone and all these things changed the way people interact, but then there were new jobs. And we have certainly seen with the rise of the internet and personal computing devices has certainly changed the way people interact and do business. And yes, certain kinds of jobs disappeared and there are lots of new jobs. So not to fear, I think just pay attention to where the opportunity is opening up and make sure you're well positioned to take advantage of new opportunities when they come up.
What would you say is long term, David? And in terms of employees, what would you say is long term? Would you say 3 or 5 years is still long term these days, or is that too broad, too long a timescale?
Depends for what.
To stay in one job, before job hopping to the next one.
I still know people that are in jobs for decades, but I know fewer and fewer that stay in jobs for decades.
Yeah.
And it used to be kind of a red flag if you had a position that you were trying to fill and you saw somebody apply who was in 5 jobs in 3 years, that would be a red flag. I don't know that it's a red flag anymore. And it also depends somewhat on the industry.
I agree. I think the IT industry, for example, there's more movement. I have a friend in that industry working in-house as an employee. He likes to talk of projects rather than jobs, and he has a very eclectic curriculum, and he probably moves every 2 to 3 years. He's probably on the move to the next job and looking for that. Okay, let's move on to the final 5. We ask all our guests these 5 just very punchy questions. So be very succinct, very one wordy, just one phrase. The first phrase that comes into your head, using just one word. How would you describe AI yourself?
Fun.
Okay, that's a good one. My last guest said soul destroying, so we got a good variety of answers to that one. I like yours. What's the best advice you've ever received from a mentor, or perhaps given to a mentee or a student or somebody you're coaching? What's the best business advice?
Take a sabbatical.
I like that one as well. That's a great one. That's very anti-hustle culture. I'm hearing a lot about how the hustle culture is not necessary. We don't need to compromise our health and well-being. So that's very
No. And also, Jason, when you're trying to make a drastic transition, you need time to self-reflect.
I do this frequently, and I just take my ebook to the coffee shop and I just grab my caramel cappuccino and I just read the ebook and note down some things, and I love that. Yeah, I love self-reflecting. What's the biggest myth people believe when it comes to, I guess, consultancy, personal development, career development? What's the biggest myth you found in your experience and career that people believe?
Well,
Falsely believe?
when it comes to consulting, I think the biggest myth is that you need a website in order to
Right.
make a sale. It's not true.
That's
You
a
need
good
it.
one.
You
Yeah,
you need somebody who's willing to buy from you.
absolutely. You need to make that first sale to get the message across. I do a lot of work on people's websites. Online presence is a big part of my, and I'm all about attraction marketing and putting a magnet and giving me a reason to get closer to you if I look at your website. So that's website is quite important in our industry. I think most people do have a website. I like to see professional emails attached to a domain, and think of someone as serious with that. A productivity tool or tip that you can't live without, something you could advise our audience about, productivity tool, tip, hack, something you love.
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia. Okay.
And you may ask, why is it productivity? I just find that the vast amount of information that is reasonably accurate that's available is just incredible. So it
Well,
saves a lot of time trying to find things.
it's kept up to date. I understand it's, within minutes. I'm on Wikipedia quite a lot, and within minutes I'll see a famous celebrity has passed, and then within seconds somebody has updated it on Wikipedia. So I think that's something of note. And then just a fun question here to finish up with: what would you rather have, wings to fly or gills to breathe underwater with, and why? And why?
Yeah, neither. Um, and to be fair, you sent me that question in advance, and I thought about it. I'm like, I can't imagine actually either one. I'm perfectly happy to stay above ground and find people with whom I can collaborate.
That's a good answer. I like that. I like that. Not being obligated to go for either of the options. Great. So any final thoughts or key takeaways? I've really enjoyed this conversation. From the point of view of a creator, I can see you're vastly experienced and have such a lot to offer. Any final key message to give to my audience? As I say, they're all vastly experienced. Some are beginners, but they're all service providers, and they're all looking to, I guess, future-proof their careers in this day
Yeah.
and age. It's quite a saturated market. There's not enough work for everyone, or it's hard to find the better work, the premium work, the plum clients. Any final thoughts on how to do that? The kind of game plan that you teach as a consultant, that you teach your people?
Just remember that your business is there to work for you, not the other way around.
Mm. Could you dive a little deeper into that? Is that a wellness health issue, or how?
It
How?
is. Well,
Yeah.
the pattern that I see, particularly people that come out of corporate and start their business, is um, they get very frustrated with their corporate life and trying to fit in.
Yeah.
And whether they leave voluntarily or get pushed out, they feel like they've left something toxic behind. So they're relieved when they first start their business,
Sure.
and there's a lot of stress. It's unlike when you move into a job. When you move into a job, your income goes from 0 to 100% your first day, right? You get paid whatever your pay rate is. You get paid that rate immediately. When you start a business, it takes time until you actually build up what you feel like is some stability between the business model and getting enough clients and the right kinds of clients, et cetera. But what very often happens is that then the next phase is um, a lot of busyness to maintain that level of stability, where you feel like you have now traded your job for a new job with a new boss, and you start to resent that new boss, and you realize that new boss is you, and that's not a good place to be. So you should be looking for ways to make your business support what I talked about earlier, which is what's important to you in your life, and to do that as simply as possible and as profitably as possible. So don't keep things simple. Don't make them too complicated, and focus on if you're running a business, focus on profitability, because that's what matters. Otherwise, you're just feeding a hobby.
Sure. Oh, sure. Yeah, that's for sure. Do you have specific facts and figures of percentage of corporate refugees who make it as entrepreneurs, and perhaps those who don't make it and end up going back to corporate work? Do you have some kind of idea of figures on that?
I don't, but what I can say is, first of all, I think it's harder to be an entrepreneur than to be an employee.
Sure.
And I think unless you're really motivated to make it work, you're going to struggle, especially unnecessarily. The other thing is, if you are mid-career or later, when you make the shift from employee to entrepreneur, ageism is going to make it more and more difficult for you to replicate your last corporate compensation. So to a certain extent, people that have made the choice to become entrepreneurs are also forced to make it work, because getting another job where they're going to make as much money gets increasingly difficult. And what I also know a number of people that have gone back and forth between employee and entrepreneur several times. It gets harder each time you go back to corporate, and it gets easier every time you go back to being an entrepreneur, because you realize what mistakes you made the previous time that you're not going to repeat. And you realize things that you could do differently, so that the trajectory into business becomes easier and more fruitful.
That's a very interesting dynamic. David, where can my listeners connect with you or learn more about your work and your specific expertise? Where's the best place?
Thank you, Jason. They can go to smashingtheplateau.com.
Okay.
That's the repository for everything we do, the podcast. We have a daily newsletter that's free. We do occasional workshops. You can register for those. And if you want to check out the community, there's information there. We have a contact form. Feel free to reach out to me if you would like to speak. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there too.
We'll make sure we get a link to smashingtheplateau.com. That's the link that David just gave you. All right, let's wrap it up for today's episode of How to Find More Direct Clients. Stay tuned for more engaging discussions on the ever-evolving landscape of language and digital marketing. Until next time, remember to stay on your game and do future-proof your career in this age of AI. Thank you from David, and thank you from me. See you next time.
Here's a fun fact about Jason. The son of 2 music teachers, Jason is still a keen amateur pianist. Thanks for tuning in to the How to Find More Direct Clients Than You Can Poke a Stick At podcast. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, why not head over to www.entrepreneurialtranslator.com to access all our tools and resources to monetize and future-proof your freelance translation business. And don't forget to hit the plus button in Apple Podcasts or iTunes, or subscribe in Spotify to be notified when new episodes drop. For regular tips and insights, business strategy, or marketing techniques straight to your inbox, please sign up at www.entrepreneurialtranslator.com.